We're going to move into a fireside chat, and the topic is predictive analytics for effective talent management. So I am going to step aside and present to you Donald Thompson, who's the CEO of the Diversity Movement, and my good friend, Rich Rosenow, who is the head of strategy at One Model. So please, Donald and Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ian. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian.
Good. So good to be with you all, and I am insanely curious, so I am excited about this conversation with Richard. And one thing I'll say up front is you're pinch hitting for a colleague, and we didn't know we were going to be hanging out together until maybe 8 hours ago. So thanks for driving up from Pittsburgh.
Delighted to be here.
And one of the things when you find fast friends, he was talking about Pittsburgh, and I used to grow up in Shady Side, and my dad used to work at Pitt, and so we ended up on a really fun conversation as we were prepping. As we get into the dialogue, and I'll start with this one question, because anything we're looking at with data, and we're thinking about how data resides in the C-suite, what's the business case for predictive analytics? How do you talk to CEOs about why the data matters, why the process, the investment in people and process, why should they care?
That's a really good, big question. I think if you're talking to your CEO and they say, why should I care about my people? You might be in the wrong room. So let's start there. It's 2025, and this is something that really gets under my skin a little bit too, where it's like, HR, we consistently get asked to justify why we should access our data, let alone predictive analytics. Whereas the rest of our peers in marketing, ops, sales, they have a ton of data. They have a ton of tools. They have a ton of things going on. 2025, you're a business leader. You are running part of the business. You should be using predictive analytics. Let's stop there. And I think that's something that a lot of CEOs are starting to come around on. I'm hoping that we don't have to justify that for too many more years. But it's a good, big question that unfortunately we still have to ask.
I appreciate that answer. And then I want to extend upon that as an additional question. How can we equip, how do we equip those of us in HR, those of us dealing with data, to better articulate how the data manages and runs and grows the business?
Man, that's a good question too. When I think about people data, one of the things that, first of all, coming to mind is every data point, behind that data point's a person. That is unique to our business. And marketing and sales, sometimes they have that, but a lot of times we're dealing with somebody's livelihood, their career, the power dynamics involved. First off, that just demands a bigger respect. When it comes to actually driving business results though, a lot of our business is still people business at the core. And I think we know that in HR. I think a lot of other people try to pretend hey, our business runs on technology and we run on just automation of things. But at the core, somebody's doing something to generate value. So everything comes back to people data at the end of the day. And so as HR, we come to the table, we say, we are bringing a critical asset to the business that is very little understood. That's also very hard to understand. If we could actually perfectly predict what was going on, social science wouldn't exist. But there's a whole field of study just to understand the complexity of what it means to be human. And then we get asked at work, why don't you understand our people? It's people are hard.
That's right.
This is hard. But I think it's worth trying, and it's worth building a better bet. And when something is as important as our workforce to actually drive business value, we should be trying to make better business decisions there.
I really appreciate that answer. And one of the things that I do at the Diversity Movement is I spend a lot of time with CEOs and boards of directors, helping them try to understand the linkage between some of the things we're trying to do, whether it's DEI and the business outcome, whether it's your data and your people and your performance. And one of the things that I would like to share with the group and then get your feedback is CEOs are used to, and executives are used to being right. Used to having the right information, used to being the smartest person in the room. And so what are some of the things you do to build up that information knowledge so that they're really following along with you in that data journey and storytelling? Because there's a little discomfort in things that people in leadership don't understand, so then they automatically put a little shield up.
Yeah.
How have you in your career as a business executive, a leader, a speaker, a coach, that communication of the value of the data?
Yeah, it's a good one. And I've worked across a couple different people analytics teams. I had a long career in people analytics before I came over to the HR tech side, and I built up a lot of bruises. I've gotten this wrong a lot. When I think about, the first one that comes to mind is just, there's a sort of an instinct to say, I'm going to finish this project, I'm going to deliver it, and their jaws are going to drop, and they're going to change the business. I've learned, do not surprise people. Just it's less fun maybe, but it's like you got to trickle feed, you got to tell them what you're doing, you got to tell them what's happening, you got to tell them what's coming at the end. And when you get to the final presentation, there should be no jaws dropped. There should be, okay, now what do we do with this from here? CEOs do not like to be surprised. They do not like to find out bad news suddenly about your predictive model, about what it created, even though it might be very statistically interesting. They want to know what's happening along the way. So communication is almost more critical to people analytics than data science.
That's very powerful. And one thing that I would add is be prepared for your information and insights to be accepted. Most people do a really good job of preparing for objections to what they're presenting, but they're not really ready for the yes and then what's next. And so that follow-through process of what your data says that then leads to different actions in the business, preparing for that discussion and what costs and execution process and implementation looks like is also a tip that I would share from the kind of the seat I sit and looking at a lot of different businesses along the way. I appreciate that answer very much. When you look at AI, we talked a lot about in the last session, and data kind of leads in that path. What are some of the ethical concerns that we have to really think about as we're looking at all the data we're consuming, but at the end of the day, people with our biases are interpreting that data? How do we manage in to where we make it a safe place for all as we move into this data-driven society?
Yeah, I think we could clear the next couple of hours, and I know a lot of people haven't had a coffee break in a while, but the truth is, I think if you're not considering the ethics of what you're doing from the start, you're behind. You've got to be thinking about this the entire way through. And it comes back to that first point that this is people data. This is not some abstract thing. We don't get to just do math. We're working with someone where, like if we have an AI that's working on promotions, like that could be incredibly damaging because it's going to get some things wrong. It's going to get some things right. And who's culpable at the end of the day?
That's right.
And so making sure we have that human in the loop, that mysterious person that Ian was talking about, but making sure in HR that we ultimately, AI should be providing a voice at the table. It should not be alone at the table. And if we're going to make a decision, it's going to be there speaking to us, providing a different perspective. But in HR, we can't lose our intuition and our gut feeling there. That is hard earned over a number of years of working within the profession. AI is there to fix and help our gaps, but it can't take over our jobs here.
So let's extend that. It's one thing when we have like a theory of how data is used in the organization. Here's what I'd like to ask you, and this is a little off script, so we'll play together a little bit. How have you done some things that didn't work out in your career as you were learning and growing, right? You're vice president, worked at Meta, do the different things, speaking and coaching. But as you were building your career as a data expert in people analytics, what are some of the lessons learned that you would share with the audience that maybe they don't have to stand on that landmine like you did?
Yeah, I've got a fun one that jumped to mind immediately, like maybe a little traumatically jumped to mind. But I was tasked at one point at one of my previous companies, I won't name which one, but to pull together who showed up to our town hall on a regular basis. So this company was holding town halls, they were talking to employees, but they were saying like, well, why don't employees get what we're saying? Who showed up to the town hall? And we had to stitch together some very unique data sets. It was some badge-in data at the town hall room for the live attendees. It was some live stream data from some systems that were actually broadcasting it live. It was some historical records of video that were being stitched together. And it was trying to find unique IDs and who was where. And I got to the live stream data. And I started talking to this data engineer who was in charge of these events. And it was a communications engineer. And I sat down, I was like, oh, the CEO told me I need to go after this. The CHRO was invested. I have my project plan. This is what I'm doing. And he said no. Just this, it was a regular engineer. He was in charge of this data set. And he put his foot down. He's like, I'm not giving you that. I don't know what you're going to do with it. This is my data. I'm included in here. My peers are in here. And it dawned, it's something I've really kept with me that, again, it's coming back to that same theme, but like this person, I had not communicated enough about where I was going, about what value I was delivering, about where my constraints were, about where this data was heading, that it fired up a lot of the hairs on the back of their neck, and they pulled that kind of ethical spot where they said, full stop. And so as much as I believe in this space, as much as I know I'm coming at it from the right positioning, there are plenty of employees that still have that very strong positioning about their own data, about their own work, and how they're going to protect the company and their peers. And making sure that I'm bringing that with me every time I have the conversation is something I've kept with me throughout my career.
I appreciate the openness there. And one of the earlier sessions I was in, I think the lunchtime keynote, and they were talking about trust in information. And trust is something that is really fragile these days. You can build it and grow in relationships with your peers, but if you make a misstep, the ramifications are so significant. And so one of the things that, as I look as a business leader and then look at data in particular, explaining to people not just the use case to why you're collecting the data, right, but the methodology around how you're interpreting it and what are the outcomes of that. And I don't come from a data science perspective, I come as a consumer of a lot of the work that folks in the room do. And so slowing down to explain that overall strategy with the insight, when you give people that moment of care to give them more of the full story, that is a way of building and maintaining trust. And a lot of times when I talk to folks that are very focused on the data analytics and the data piece, it's really about the zeros and the ones, and it can get very, very focused there, which is fine. But we have to uplift that conversation to the storytelling of what's the real use case and what's the outcome.
Yeah, I love that word trust, and it's one I think about a lot because I've seen, just in my role at OneModel, I get to talk to a lot of people analytics teams. As one of the things that I've seen that undoes a people analytics team, it's losing the trust. Because we have one of the few data sets that will actively fight you if you lose their trust.
That's right.
They will stop responding to surveys, they will stop filling out forms, they will stop entering their data correctly. If you break trust with your employees, your whole mission comes undone.
So when we think about employee experience, right, and I'm going to pivot a little bit because we're talking about talent, right? And then last group was talking about data and the talent acquisition process. I would be interested in how we're looking at candidates, right, to grow the field of people analytics from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective. So you're in a position where you're growing talent, where you're looking at hiring and interviewing and different things. How are you ensuring that, as a phrase a good friend of mine, Greg Boone, says, that the machines don't pick the winners, that people pick the winners? What are some of the things that you think about data in that talent acquisition space?
Yeah, you touched on a couple pieces. Kind of thinking about the people analytics space is actually an interesting kind of set there too. So one of the things I'm very passionate about is helping get people into the right roles across the people analytics world. So as a side gig, I run a job board for people analytics. So across US, UK, Canada, Australia, we pull down every job every 3 weeks. That's a manual process. I'm just in there pulling the jobs. But we put that out there to kind of help connect people to roles. Something that's interesting about people analytics, and this is really off the record kind of riff here about this.
Good.
When you see fringe technologies, when you see new areas open up, you'll see people with very strong safety nets start to apply for those roles. And this is something I saw when I worked at a self-driving car company. We were actually interviewing chief diversity officers at the time. And the one woman I was talking to was mentioning, she said, hey, for this self-driving car company and a fringe startup that might go bankrupt, it did go bankrupt, people with very strong safety nets will apply. And you tend to see people from very, very strong backgrounds within this sort of like not protected class, this sort of like privileged classes that have that social safety net that they can apply to these roles and kind of get out there into this fringe area. I think we do see that in people analytics. Mm-hmm. And when you start to look at HR as a whole, which is largely 75% women, it's a very diverse function. We see a lot of people across HR. People analytics, unfortunately, I don't see it as that diverse. So we actually do have something looking internally within the people analytics space. How do we encourage more voices? Are we bringing in more people? And just a shout out to the very start of the conversation, Ian O'Keefe mentioned the Society for People Analytics. I think that's been a very great vehicle to start some of these conversations at the professional level to say, as a profession, who are we? How do we apply some of these learnings that we've applied in a lot of our companies about how do we increase diversity? How do we get more voices into the conversation? How can we start to apply that across our profession? And if you're looking to get involved with that, if you'd like to be involved with that, the Society for People Analytics is a great place to do that. And I'm hoping over the next couple of years we start to see that change.
That's awesome. And one of the reasons I say awesome, I don't want to blanket, is I like when people give specific actionable things, right? That someone can go and join that organization and give their time and their treasure and talents to be supportive of that. In today's environment, there's a lot of M&A work. There's organizations that are changing and moving data from one system to another. Let's get a little into the detail a little bit. When you're looking at evaluating a new system, when you're looking at merging data from one system to another, what are some of the things that you look out for to make sure that data integrity stays consistent?
That's a great question. So first off, I'm over at OneModel. Come see us at the booth. I won't talk about that here, but that's quite a setup that I'm very tempted. But there are a lot of partners out there. Let me generalize that. I think 10, 15 years ago when I started in this space, you were on your own. You had to go to the system, pull the data, make sense of it yourself, find some ways in your data warehouse that you built out of Excel to make this sing. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of phenomenal partners today, and the ecosystem has just grown pretty dramatically. So as you try to bring together those disparate data sets, whether that's HR data, business data, other data, please don't go alone anymore. reach out to your community, reach out to partners, find people in this space. We've actually started to solve a lot of these things across the space. That's the broad we. And by doing so, we can actually lift up the whole space. So we're not all spending 80% of our time creating the data set and then eventually getting to the data science or the insight or the consulting. We've got to push the profession into that space. And it's easy to feel like a hero sometimes by taking that all on and making it happen and spending a big weekend knee deep in your Access database that you've had to maintain. But it's like, we've got to make sure we're evolving this whole profession. And as we do so, we're going to start looking more like that consulting arm of HR and that strategic arm of HR, which is where business value is created.
So you mentioned where business value is created. And so that is the language of leadership, right? What is the time to value, right? It's not just what you're doing or what you're proposing, but what are the sequences of events that you can predict to me when I'm going to get value from that service, that data, that product. I'm interested, I want to make sure I phrase this correctly. What advice would you give, right? And I've gotten this question as a business leader, as an entrepreneur and CEO. In your career, if you look back, that 20-year-old self getting into the game of business, what would you do different? What would you advise yourself? What is some of that advice you would give, some of those lessons learned?
I think it's so tricky right now because the path is changing into this space. I think when I started down this path to kind of get involved in people analytics, there was a bit more of a clear thing you could do. It's like, go learn SQL, go figure out some kind of coding language, start to dig into the data, start to learn some systems. And we've talked about it all day, but I think generative AI is wiping out some of those early career paths, which is a little tricky because like some of the advice, like looking to your people that have come before you for advice on how they kind of went through their path, some of those paths are not there in the same way. And so I think if I were to take my 20-year-old self and bring them to today and say, go at it again, let's start from today, really what I would lean into is that people side of people analytics. It's the vertical application of analytics and it's the deep theory. That's where you're going to start to see the business value because a lot of what's happening on the core data side will quickly become commodified. There's a lot of providers out there, there's a lot of startups out there that are trying really hard to make sure that the ability to code, the ability to build technical things, and AI is better at that stuff. What's going to remain is going to be those very human things. It's a bit more theory, it's a bit more listening with that sort of like, now that I have the data, now that I can stand on the data, where can I go when it comes to my intuition? Where can it go when it comes to that kind of core HR stuff that maybe we thought we were going to throw out as we went down this people analytics path? How do we bring that stuff back? And so I think going down this path, next step, if you come at it from this analytics background, if you're coming into the space kind of from a core data science or a core analytics, really lean into those HR business partners, learning to kind of figure out how does this business unit, how does HR create value for the business, is a critical step in the next couple of years.
I really appreciate that. The thing that I would add to that is don't shy away from an opportunity to present your research and your findings. I am, people don't believe this all the time, but I'm a hardcore introvert. And so I play extrovert in moments like this. And so a lot of times folks that are really focused in the data component, right, will be very deferential to others in terms of the presentation at the C-suite in different levels. And I would encourage folks to work on those communication skills, to work on those presentation skills, and how do you tell a story that's powerful with the data that you've built and collected and modeled? Because those are the things that are going to make you stand out. Because I believe very firmly that at some of the entry-level arenas, right, leaders everywhere are looking at how to save headcount, right, by leveraging AI and technology. What will not ever go out of style are people that can communicate data to a broad level of stakeholders, right, in a manner that is effective, clear, and concise. And so I think all of us in our respective roles and different things have to not just look at AI as a replacement piece, but how does it accelerate our careers so that we then can work on the strategy and different components that can really drive our careers forward.
Yeah, and just to build on that too, a lot of times we see the sort of like my data side of my brain and my people side of my brain, and they're opposed in different ways, or maybe I'm 20%, 80%, or 80%, 20%. The reality is those are two things that are going to have to go forward together at full steam. We need really empathetic nerds. We need people that know people and know data. And it's not a trade-off anymore. You've really got to lean into both of those spaces. And I think a lot of HR teams, the funny thing about becoming really good at people analytics is it lets you, when you go through that, when you come out the other side, you earn the right to go back to HR. When you get to the table through the data, when you kind of earn that respect and trust of your peers and the confidence of what you're speaking about, you get back to the core things about HR then. But it is that path of going through. It's not avoiding. It's not saying I'm just going to stick to my gut. It's that path through that's so critical.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was with, I'm from North Carolina and in the US, and Rob Gould, one of my associates from Workplace Options, our company was recently acquired, so I'm going through the integration piece and all that good, mostly good stuff, I will share. But we were talking with a handful of clients, and one of the things in the DEI space is that ability to link data insights to the business outcomes. And I would say that that's one of the things that we've not done in the DEI space overall as well as we can do. And AI and machine learning and people analytics will help us get there. My final question as I describe this to you is what is that last piece of information you'd share with the group that I didn't know to ask? That we didn't prep, like let's just assume like I just missed it, right? What would you share with the folks that are listening that I didn't know to ask you?
That's a really good question. Okay, so I think something I think about a lot is how we're preparing for agents. So we've talked a lot about AI today, and AI is like that virtual brain, that robot brain. Agents you could think about as the robot body. Let's lift the hood, let's put an AI in, and then it goes and accomplishes some tasks virtually. As we think about agents, so over at One Model, we've been preparing our platform and our tools and our systems. Historically, we've had sort of like, we built a house with a pretty walkway and flowers, and that's our UI, UX for humans. Humans come into our platform, they like to use it, it's visually pretty, it's great. There's a big shift happening where agents are going to be coming into the platforms now, and they're going to be accomplishing tasks on behalf of different people across the business. And it's radically changing how we build product. We have to batten the hatches. We have to make sure we're prepared for a lot more volume. We have to, like that sign that said, wet paint, do not touch. Humans respect that. The robots will touch all the wet paint. And so preparing our house for agents to come in is something we are critically on top of when it comes to One Model. I think that's something for a lot of HR teams, because a lot of the things we've done in HR have been prepared for, operated by, and delivered by humans for a very long time. We're going to see a different method to deliver. We're going to have to invite a lot of these agents into our world, and it's going to very dramatically change the whole function of HR.
That's awesome. I want to leave some space for you all. And I've gotten through my notes. I'm really enjoying this conversation and hope
Likewise.
that it will continue.
Please.
Right, as we've
Please.
gotten to know one another over the last day. But I wanted to see if there's any hands in the crowd, and then they'll bring the microphones to you all and see if we have any questions before we finish up this fireside chat.
I mentioned coffee. Everyone's ready for coffee.
So we have a gentleman right there, and they're going to bring you the microphone.
Okay. So my name is Fabrizio, I work for GoEasy. My question is regarding what exactly are the sort of tip you can give for a company that hasn't started the predictive analytics journey yet? And although I hear you when you say don't do it yourself, go find help. I'm pretty persistent, and I still want to try it for a bit. And so is there any sort of initial guidance that you can provide for a company that hasn't initiated it yet? Is there any sort of correlation analysis that you would suggest to start with? Or would you stick with go find someone to help you?
And it's a great clarification, because I think find someone to help you build infrastructure, get yourself started, get you the right tools. I still think a lot of us are still going to have to do a lot of the work here in this space. So data science is a really good example of that. I think there's kind of two ways to answer this when it comes to tips. One is around attrition, and one is around approach. So a lot of teams start with attrition. And so maybe I'll raise a hand. Who here's done a predictive model for attrition? There's a reason for that, because attrition is a 1 or a 0. It happens a lot, and it sucks. And it's something that we know that if we can get around this, if we can help this in some way, we're going to see a benefit to the business. And so attrition data is also usually in your HRIS, which you usually have access to. When you start to look at productivity or business value, you need access to like finance systems and IT tools and a lot of other things that requires you to just get your arms around a lot more. So a lot of teams, when they're starting down this predictive journey, they say, I want to do something, I want to test something here. Predictive attrition is a great spot. I think the other tip I would give is around the philosophy around predictive attrition, or predictions in general. I think a lot of times when we think about predictive analytics, it's like, I want to know the future. And that'd be great. It'd be great to know the future. The truth is the real power of a predictive model is knowing the features. And so it's pulling it apart to say, okay, this thing happens, this thing occurred, what's going on here, and what can that tell me about today? Because a predictive attrition model is going to be wrong immediately. Because if you do it correctly, and you know what goes into it, you say, hey, it's the sales team, it's this particular region, it's this particular manager who's got to go, on day 2, you should change those things. And you're going to make your prediction wrong. Because you're going to change those things and the attrition is going to come down. And so the real power of a predictive model, it's less about knowing the future as much as it is about how do I build programming today and how do I inform things today. And that philosophy shift can really change how you approach predictive modeling, because sometimes you go into it, you're like, I've got to get it right. How am I going to get this thing perfect? And the truth is, it's if I know a couple good bets about what's going on, let's go fix those things. And then let's see that kind of like where I thought it was going to happen versus what I can actually accomplish. Those things start to come out of it. I think that's true across a lot of different predictive models.
That's good stuff. Other questions?
Richard, you are here talking about predictive analytics, and your predecessor from Insight 222 talked about having this talking to CEO, CHRO. Oftentimes, and I don't think this will come as a surprise to many people in the room, not the data literacy at the top of the HR ladder is not the greatest. We're talking, 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, we have headcount. What is your advice to your clients, your practitioners, especially your clients that now have the power of one model and the predictive models? How do you translate that into something that at that level with 30-second attention span can be really actioned, trusted, and grasped?
It's a great question. So this is something I'm still working on too. I'll give an example. I had a group of people, this was at Talreo's back in June. So one of these kind of people analytics conferences, I asked a bunch of people this question. I said, how much should your CHRO know about data architecture? How much should they know about data architecture? Why your data architecture matters? The people analytics people in the room said they should know a little bit about this. I want them to know what's going on. They need to know why this is a blocker for me. They gave a lot of good reasons. I've posed that question to CHROs. They have said, I want to know nothing about data architecture. I don't think they're wrong. I think we're hired to run this stuff and keep this out of their purview because we're hired as executives to be a part of this business. The CHRO has to manage out and up. They've got to manage their peers, they've got to manage the board, they've got to manage the organization as a whole. It is not their duty to know business and data architecture, which is really tough because that's an invisible space for us then too. As people analytics leaders, when we have to go hammer out the data warehouse and go fix things for a month, it looks like we're not doing anything sometimes if we're not communicating properly. I would actually flip it a little bit and say, where can we add business literacy to our people analytics teams? And how can we actually translate what we want to say into that language that CHRO is speaking? And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, because I don't like that. I want to talk about the data architecture. I don't want to talk about the end outcome and where this is going, but I think there is something there where we do have to realize what role we play within the organization. And part of that is to hide this work from the CHRO. And we have to just get some big things done. And so I would say the advice there, kind of not just kind of lamenting about it, but the advice would be find out what matters, find out what's critical, and find out how you can start to move those levers for them. And always come back to that about how you're continuing to help them down their path and towards their goals, and how you're accomplishing business results. And maybe talk to us here at the conference about the data architecture. And that's why I'm here, honestly. So come find me and talk about data architecture anytime.
That is a great question. We could talk all day.
Yes.
But this little timer has now turned red. And so we're going to wind it down. It was great to spend time with you.
Likewise.
And I think the audience got a lot. And again, like I said, I hope we'll continue this conversation. So give Richard a hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Donald, thank you.